I'm sure there were some suitors. I think he probably wanted to return to Philadelphia if possible. I'm sure other teams were offering similar, 1 to 2 year deals for around, 12 to 14 million, whatever it was.
Are we getting closer to a situation where it's going to be like college and people are just going to turn over quarterbacks?
We appreciate you streaming on into the deep end with us here on Birds 365, McMullen and McDonald. Joined by our buddy Brad Spielberger, Pro Football Focus and OverTheCap.com, one of the best cap experts in the media. We've got a couple of guys on teams that actually do a pretty good job. Brad does it for his media outlets, and he does it for us when we get him to join us here on Birds 365. Been pretty busy these last couple of weeks, huh, Mr. Spielberg?
Yeah, it has not been a slow couple days for me at all.
Well, Brad, I'm getting out of the way of this one because I know, I think it was you who called it one of the most complicated contracts in the NFL with Fletcher Cox. The Eagles have leveraged that down the road so many times, so many Post-it notes on that. I can picture it, the hard copy with all the Post-it notes and the red and it crossed out. What the heck were the Eagles doing with Fletcher Cox? Why now? Because they're still taking on significant dead money. What do you think was the plan behind what they did with Fletcher Cox?
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned the Eagles do have some of the best cap guys in the NFL. Obviously, when your GM is a former cap guy and Howie Roseman, that would make some sense. But Jake Rosenberg, Bryce Johnson, a lot of the guys in that front office get a lot of credit for a lot of the work they do. So what was happening with Fletcher Cox's deal was when the guarantee triggered on his compensation in 2022, it actually opened up a window where they had the right to exercise an option bonus, and they could have pushed even more money down the line. I won't get fully into the weeds, but essentially they didn't want to deal with that. They wanted to get out from under that money before that began. As soon as the money became guaranteed, it kind of complicated matters a bit further. So what they did was essentially just, there was the trade rumors. Obviously, maybe that was being explored a little bit. But I do think they wanted him back no matter what. So he essentially just took a pay cut, but they couldn't just negotiate a simple pay cut on the old deal. They had to rip it up and just sign a new contract.
So if it was, the date was Thursday, I believe, for whether it was 16 or 18 million, that was that trigger that was going to be guaranteed. Is it just a matter of not being able to work out the details beforehand, and you have to take that calculated gamble of technically making him a free agent, or anybody can pick up the phone and maybe offer 2 years guaranteed money, more guaranteed money? Was it just simply a timing, or was there a strategy behind the fact they had to release him to just get that old contract off the books and start with a new sort of simplified deal?
Yeah, so you mentioned it at the top that they still did take on a good chunk of dead money, and my guess is, Cox and his camp were in a situation where that kind of gave them some leverage. Where if the team approached them about a pay cut on that deal or kind of reworking it, they could say, "Well, we know it's going to be tough for you guys to kind of cut this contract, and it's going to bring on substantial dead money regardless. So why would we play ball? Maybe give us an extension that helps you guys for 1 or 2 years or something like that." And so I think that's probably what led to a standstill. But nevertheless, yeah, they had to do something before that date on March 18th, I think it was. They had to do something. And so because they weren't able to work something out, they had to go with the cut. Again, like it's like I said, it is one of the more complicated scenarios. I could spend the whole show just breaking down, and I don't think anyone wants that. So nevertheless, had to be done. And now he's back, and it just kind of makes things a little bit simpler and a little bit cleaner.
All right, so let's do a little cut to the chase. Did the Eagles save any money by doing what they did? Is it in this cap? Is it flexibility going forward with voidable years? Give us a little speculation as to why the capologists that the Eagles have in place ended up doing what they did.
Yeah, so the report I saw was it's a 1-year, $14 million deal is the new deal for Fletcher Cox. And I still have not seen the full details there. And I would venture to guess that in the same way Jason Kelsey's deal was reported as 1 year, $14 million, it's not quite that. And I think maybe it's the same scenario with Fletcher Cox. But let's say it is just 1 year, $14 million. They would have saved $3 million in cash there, compared to the $17 million he was owed on the old deal for 2022. As for the cap, yes, they still take on this big dead cap burden and then bring in a new contract. So, it's maybe not. But the thing about the cap is that, and the Eagles know this better than anyone, you can't just look at it in a single year vacuum. So, they pushed some dead cap in 2023. All told, it will benefit them. It's just a matter of kind of pushing the money around and when are you taking that hit?
So thanks for letting me follow up here, John. Do you believe Fletcher and his agent did any quick shopping? Because it was a pretty good quick turnaround that the report was he's released. And then within 8 or 9 hours, report was very close to re-signing. Now he's officially re-signed. Do you think his agent saw what was out there in the market and found out that there was no one willing to play in those neighborhood / number markets, and that's why he came to terms to re-up?
I don't know. I think that the interior defensive line group was arguably the weakest position group in free agency. I think we saw a handful of strong contracts as teams kind of overpaid because of the scarcity there. And so I think he probably did have a handful of suitors. I know, maybe he's not the Fletcher Cox he once was. I still think he's probably better than a lot of the guys that got signed in this free agency class. So I'm sure there were some suitors. I think he probably wanted to return to Philadelphia if possible. I'm sure other teams were offering similar, 1 to 2 year deals for around, 12 to 14 million, whatever it was. But ultimately, as long as Philly played ball and gave him a solid deal, didn't kind of lowball him or really, not make a respectable offer, I think he wanted to stay.
Brad, one interesting, it seems to be an uptick to me. You'd probably know a little bit better. I remember Anthony Barr turning tail on Jody's Jets a couple years ago, but this year we've had at least 3 pretty high profile players, Randy Gregory, J.D. McKissick, I forget the third, Jody, help me out, agreed to terms, Zadarius Smith, agreed to terms, and then all of a sudden said, you know what, I'm going to do a 180 in the so-called legal tampering period, which is an oxymoron, but they changed their minds. So is that, have you seen a spike in that trend? Is that, it seems to be more than usual to me.
It's funny you mention that. So I did, it does happen. We get it, like you said, Anthony Barr happened a couple of years ago. We get a couple examples, but it's usually like one an off season or maybe even like one every other off season. When the third one came through, I reached out to a couple agents and I just said, like, what's the explanation for this? Or why do you think this is happening and stuff like that? And they said, I think it's just kind of an outlier year. And 2 different ones said, I don't think people realize we're negotiating with multiple teams down to the very last second. Like, we may have the same offer on the table and we're going back and forth on language, or we're trying to get a sweetener from one or the other. And it is like you could be 99% of the way done with 2 clubs and then you make that decision. So they said, yeah, you maybe just don't hear about it as often. It doesn't get out as often. And you don't see a true kind of sea change where a guy makes a decision. But this is why, both of them also kind of lamented. This is why reporting is done too early. And people put stuff out before the papers actually signed, reports get out, and that's kind of their, they kind of blame that more than putting it on, the onus on them. But it does happen.
They're the ones putting it out, Brad.
That's the thing, though, is that for the most part, sure, but not always, right? Or maybe they'll tell the guy like, hey, look, we are at the finish line, we're almost done. You should maybe hold off on reporting this, but just so you know, get ready to report on it. And the guy just kind of fires it off and says, these 2 sides are agreed on a deal. And they're like, look, we didn't actually, we didn't agree on everything. We agreed on the parameters. We agreed on the overall value. But in the case of Randy Gregory, and this is what folks don't get too, look, the numbers and the money is obviously a big part of it. These are, 50, 60, 100-page contracts with language that goes on forever about all the different contingencies. And so, Randy Gregory's, for example, was just simply voiding guarantees if he got fined by the league. Like that's not, but people think contracts are getting held up over, but that is what contracts are getting held up on over.
All right. My next question is a 2-parter, and they tie to each other. Reported that Darius Slay's contract has been redone by the Philadelphia Eagles to save over $10 million in salary cap space. Sometimes we hear about these deals that the team just implements it, that they don't even need to get permission from the player. They just move money around. Now, the player never objects because usually it goes from base salary to some kind of a bonus, which means guaranteed, which means cash up front, which everybody is going to take when they're told that's coming their way. But sometimes they do need to talk to the player. They probably talked to Fletcher Cox about redoing his deal before they did release him and then re-sign him. Explain how that works where a team can just move money around. And do you know in the Slay deal, was it something they did working with Darius Slay's agent, or was it just the Eagles doing their own in-house restructuring of contracts to provide salary cap relief?
So what that is, and I would say, almost every team on almost every contract, not all of them though, but for the most part, it's called automatic conversion language. And so it is written into the contract up front, essentially, that if we need to restructure your deal to create salary cap space, we can do that unilaterally without you signing off on it, without you giving us permission. There is a distinction though, and Darius Slay, the last 2 off seasons had this happen. If you want to add void years onto the end of it so you can spread even more money out, for that reason, you do need to get the player's consent, because technically you're signing a new contract by adding a dummy year to the deal.
Right.
So for Slays, I think you probably did have to say, yes, okay, we can do this. But yeah, that is how teams do it. It's automatic conversion language. They don't need the player to sign off on it. And that is standard in, like I said, 95% of NFL contracts.
Brad, philosophical question for you, because I was reading Peter King's column this morning, and he put 5 contracts he liked in free agency. And, it got me thinking. And by and large, generally, the guys at the top of free agency, the stars, the top players at each position, are going to get overpaid, typically. I noticed this trend that nobody likes contracts. No, but this guy got paid too much money. This guy got paid too much money. And especially at the top, because those guys are, when you hit the open market and there's desperation, and we see with Deshaun Watson, different, obviously, trade, but 5 years fully guaranteed. The mentality of, you have to have good players. So in the valuation of position, we know running back is devalued. We know linebackers devalued. Obviously, quarterback is not devalued. Does it just come down to evaluation? Because once you have evaluation of the player, not valuation, because once you have a superstar, don't you have to pay him? Even though it's kind of baked in, you're going to overpay him? Or do you have to be disciplined?
I think the bigger issue is more when non-superstars, when like fringe, when very good players get paid like superstars and stuff like that. I think it's more where the issues come in. But I will say to your point that whenever kind of everyone catches up to something, I think we then kind of hit an inflection point where maybe you can then kind of leverage that and use that against the trend. So, for years and years, we all thought, oh, you go out and sign these big ticket free agents, then teams kind of realize like these deals are not working out. Everyone's overpaying just to get them. They're not getting the production they were hoping for. Maybe now it's gone so far that you maybe can kind of find some good values in that market. Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's just at the end of the day, teams that have the player in the beginning, they're going to know that guy better than anyone else. What I would say is if the guy hits free agency, that in itself is a signal.
That's a bad sign, yeah.
If the guy's an elite player, he's not a free agent, right? So,
yeah.
Teams have too much control in this league to let that happen. But I hear you. Maybe we now have reached the point where if everyone thinks that, then you probably could actually sign a top of market guy, and it won't be as bad as it used to be.
Brad, a quick story for both you and John that kind of frames the question / point that I want to make. Doing a radio show 30 years ago, 20 some odd years ago, I had Bobby Clark on as a guest, and I asked him about a free agent signing by another team. And he said to me, I'm not going to allow another team to dictate the salary structure of my team. And I just kind of rolled my eyes and said, well, Bobby, you may not like it, but oh, yes, that salary structure has just been changed because this other team made this decision. And man, did he get mad at me for saying that. He didn't want to hear it, but I felt the need to do so. How is the rest of the National Football League responding today, do you think, behind closed doors to the Deshaun Watson deal? Because, oh, by the way, the bar has just been reset across the entire National Football League. And no matter how much other teams want to say, well, we wouldn't have done that. Well, you're right. You may not have, but, it's going to affect what you're going to need to do going forward. How are the other 31 teams reacting to what happened with Deshaun Watson this weekend?
There are some owners that are probably very upset. And to put it simply, like, yes, the 5 years fully guaranteed is now 2 years beyond Kirk Cousins. But the thing that's really is different there is that folks don't know this. If you fully guarantee money as an owner, you have to put the future money into escrow. So the Browns have to put $157.5 million into escrow for Deshaun Watson's contract alone. That is something that not all owners can do. I mean, I'm not going to name owners, but like there are owners that do not have the liquidity and the cash on hand to ever do that.
I did it for you, Brad. Mark Davis.
There's one. The owner in Philadelphia, that's not an issue. If he wanted to do that, I'm sure he could. I'm sure he would. But that is an issue where it is creating a market that there are clubs that cannot contend in. So obviously it's an outlier situation. And obviously, there's ways to combat that. But you look in the same state of Ohio, if Joe Burrow asks for that contract next year, which he should, Mike Brown cannot do that. Like again, I don't want to speak to the man's finances, but based on everything he's done in his contractually in the past, I don't think he can do that. So definitely, I don't think owners were stoked about the structure there. It definitely changes the game. I think players are going to push now. Obviously, quarterback is its own market and has different things happen to it. But, if you're a player now, you say, okay, well, quarterback is 5 years, but I want fully guaranteed money in, the third year of my deal now as a position player and stuff like that. It absolutely changes things for everyone.
Well, you mentioned that name. That's always been an interesting name to me, Kirk Cousins, because he's a good quarterback, but, he gets paid like a great quarterback. And then it's tough to build a winning roster around that type of quarterback. Here in Philadelphia, people have made this a big thing that the Eagles have this shelf life because Jalen Hurts is a young ascending player to build up the roster around him. But man, that window is small, Brad. I mean, this is it this year. And then you have to start talking extension with a player like Jalen Hurts. I mean, you can play out the fourth year of his rookie deal, but he's probably not going to be happy with that, even though he's a stand-up guy. I think they could do it, but ultimately the shelf life is not that long. And then you have to start talking about what's the benchmark now? $35 million for a quarterback in this league? Cost of doing business for an effective starting quarterback? Never mind the Aaron Rodgers and the Deshaun Watsons and the top tier. Are we getting closer to a situation where it's going to be like college and people are just going to turn over quarterbacks? Because if you don't have the superstar, why are you going to pay 35 million for just a guy?
100%. I mean, I think we're seeing that play out right now in real time where teams reacted to, Carson Wentz and Jared Goff in 2016, got the extension after their third year. And then obviously things went straight downhill from there. And I think the overreaction or just reaction to that was, Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson not getting extensions last offseason. And now, because both of those guys probably lowered their stock, if anything, last year, we're now seeing the reaction from Kyler Murray. I mean, he put out that statement because he's afraid of the same thing happening. He's owed $5.5 million in cash this upcoming season. I mean, and he's worth, whatever you think of him, he's worth, 5-10 times that. So, yes, I do think teams now realize paying a mediocre guy or a guy that has not shown he can be elite, this big money deal kills you. And Cleveland does not pull off this trade if they had extended Baker Mayfield, which, hey, credit to them. I mean, he was coming off their first playoff win in 25 years and all these things. He was a solid player in his third year. They did not make that mistake. He was obviously not good last year. I do. I think that is going to be a trend now where we're not going to see the Kirk Cousins, the Derek Carrs, those guys that when they signed their extension was top of market, and they were good but not great quarterbacks, I think there's going to be pushback. But of course, then yes, the players are then going to kind of exert their leverage and maybe not show up, not play, do all these things. It's going to be an ongoing battle for sure.
All right, I want to tie your cap abilities with your football evaluation abilities here off the question that John just asked about. Could we see an era whereby it's just a churn, an overturn every 5 years? You get a rookie deal, you move on to the next guy because you don't want to pay $40 million. Here's one of the hurdles to that. This year's NFL draft quarterback class. It's nothing special. I don't know that there is a franchise quarterback. And if it's your turn to churn and it's the year that you need to go out and get that new guy and you look and go, oh, shoot, we don't really like any of these guys, then what do? Somebody's got to play quarterback for your team. Give me your overall grade, overall evaluation of this year's draftable quarterbacks. How high is high? Is it going to be Willis first because he's got the biggest upside, but maybe the biggest floor as well? Give us the Brad Spielberger draft report on quarterbacks coming out in this year's draft.
Well, no, I mean, your point is perfect, and that's why teams are afraid to do this, because even having an average quarterback or maybe slightly above average, that stability, that high floor is worth a ton of money or worth a ton of value in the NFL. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this quarterback class at all. I do think Malik Willis will be the first quarterback off the board. I think he will go in the top 10 picks. Maybe if someone has to trade up into the 9-10 range, but I do think that'll happen. And then I think Kenny Pickett will be a first rounder, and Desmond Ridder is a fringe, maybe bottom of the first round type guy as well. But yeah, I don't think it's a particularly strong class. I would be nervous. I mean, look, I don't want to start any of these guys right away. Pickett's probably the most pro ready. Willis, in my opinion, you are targeting week 1, 2023 with him. I do think his tools are just a lot better than everybody else's. But yeah, that is the risk. And that's the whole point. That's why these guys get paid, because if you're a GM and your job is on the line, we may make fun of going, 9-8 and sneaking the playoffs as a wild card, or because you should have bottomed out and had a top pick, whatever. The incentives of the decision makers are not going to align with our, armchair GMs at home. And so that's why those guys get paid.
All right, I'm going to pick on a couple players here, Brad, because what the heck? They're making a lot of money, so they can take it. But I'm going to guarantee to you right now that after 2 years, Kristen Kirk and Marcus Williams are either out or they're restructuring their deals. Because to me, they're good. They're good players, but they're not great players, sort of what we were talking about at quarterback. But they're being paid like great players now. And the expectation by fans in their particular markets will be to see great players. And they're not going to be great players. And they're going to go, what the hell's going on here? Have NFL teams done research on this? And have people like you done research on just how many big money free agents flame out after those first 2 years, when teams are smart enough at least to structure those things to sort of have an out in year 3?
Absolutely. This is something that's been going on for a long time. Expected contract value, or just the actual expectation of how much money on this deal is actually going to get paid. How many years is this guy actually going to play on this contract? For Kirk, in the structure there, it basically is a 2-year deal, and then we'll see. It is way too much money regardless of the structure. But yeah, and then Williams, the thing there is, yeah, it is a huge deal, but it's also interesting there for him to not get the same money that free safeties were getting in 2020 offseason. So 2 years ago now, it's a bit surprising. It's not, because the NFL has kind of shown the last couple of years they value these true deep third free safeties less. The guys that are willing to pay are guys that can play in too high, that can come down in the box, make plays in the run game, maybe can cover in the slot, just have more skill set than just being a ball hawk that stands in the deep third and maybe only impacts a handful of plays a game. But yeah, I mean, that's what goes back to our original conversation. That's why, these deals are coming down a bit, is the odds that these guys are playing on 4 and 5 year deals is close to 0%.
Yeah, I got a disagreement with both of you guys. I think Marcus Williams is a hell of a player.
Yeah.
You just described him as being great in one aspect of, or a couple, not all aspects of being a safety. don't you think the Ravens are going to expect him to be that kind of safety, to be able to do more, to give him that kind of money? I think he's capable of it. I'm apparently a bigger fan than either of you two guys. You don't think the Ravens be okay with paying him to do exactly what you just suggested are his strengths?
I thought he got better last year in those areas. I thought he did improve, better run defense, better just, more versatility to his game. I'm a fan for sure. No, like I'm saying, like the fact that he could have pushed to try to get $16+ million per year. He was a top guy available coming off a franchise tag, another good season. I don't disagree with you. It's just that's kind of been the trend. But yeah, like you're saying, I mean, we're talking about an organization that understands safety play probably better than any other organization in the NFL. I just think that, again, yeah, if they viewed him truly as a guy they thought was elite in all those areas, he's getting more, not more than Jamal Adams, but he's approaching Jamal Adams. He's not getting $14 million per year.
Brad Spielberger, make sure you read him at Pro Football Focus, does a tremendous job. I think the best salary cap analyst here in the media, still a contributor to overthecap.com. I didn't know you were a former Vikings legal intern, though, Brad. That is news to me. So that's a bit of a surprise, and maybe you should have warned him on Kirk Cousins.
I bet she's got a good story for us, McMullen, that he can't tell here on the air.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to get him out for a cocktail one night to give us some behind-the-scenes legal maneuverings of the Minnesota Vikings.
Last one. I think we can work something out.
Yeah. Was Kevin Warren there when you were there?
He was. Actually, when I was there, it was pretty surreal. We come into the office one day, all the TVs are on the Big Ten Network channel, and we're like, what the hell's going on? And it's Kevin Warren walking up to the podium to say, he's leaving Minnesota to go to the Big Ten. Everyone loved him there. Everyone was happy for him, but it was very surreal and weird. Like the guy who ran the whole show, announcing his new job on live television as we're all kind of sitting there. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Kevin Warren, I forget who took over for the Vikings. You might know, but I do want to put you on the spot. Last one for me. Give me 2 or 3 contracts that Brad Spielberger likes here in free agency. Just cost-effective, good, solid deals for those respective teams.
Yeah, so I thought Baltimore Ravens did well with Morgan Moses. Right tackle, can play some left tackle, 3-year, $15 million deal. He was with the Jets last year, but with Washington for almost a decade, I think, before that. Just a really solid player. Doesn't miss really many snaps at all. Good as a pass protector and a run blocker. I just thought that was a great deal. I'll stick on the offensive line. Young guard James Daniels, going to be 24 years old in week 1. Will be younger than some prospects taken in this year's draft class. Steelers signed him for 3 years, $26.25 million per year total. About almost, a little under $9 million per year. I thought that was a great value deal as well. Let's see, one other one for you. I made a list this morning on blanket, but those 2 I thought were great.
Very good. All right, I'm going to put your feet to the fire, Cat Boy, and make you make a prediction. Russell Wilson's contract was not redone. I thought that would get done before he got traded to the Broncos. I've seen quotes from the general manager, Patton, said, well, we'll talk about it, but nothing is imminent. It's going to get imminent real quick here after what happened with Deshaun Watson. If Watson is at $46 million per, which 230 by 5, 46. Rodgers is 50. Russell Wilson in between. Does he go past Rodgers at over 50 per? Does he come in under? And I know there's guaranteed, non-guaranteed, a lot of different ways you can look at it. Where does Russell Wilson's contract negotiation fall with the 2 biggest dogs, Rodgers and Watson, now being in place?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that the best comparison for his situation is Matthew Stafford, who did him no favors in 2 respects. So when Stafford went to the Rams, he had a 2-year deal for about $50 million remaining. It's the exact same situation for Russell Wilson. He has 2 years, $51 million remaining. Stafford agreed to wait a year. Russell Wilson, it sounds like they're trying to convince him to wait 1 more year and then sign a deal next offseason. The second way Stafford did not help him, signed a 4-year, $160 million extension for $40 million per year. He did get $135 million of that guaranteed, so very strong, guarantee structure. But yeah, I mean, that works against Russell Wilson getting some market topping deal very strongly. I mean, he took a discount. He kind of said he took a discount, but nevertheless. So I think it's not going to happen this offseason. I think they will wait until next offseason. And then my answer kind of comes down to, how does 2022 go with Denver? I mean, look, if they make the playoffs, then I'm sure he'll get, I would say, between Watson and Rodgers, but he might push for over 50. If they, finish third or fourth in this gauntlet AFC West, I think they'll say, look, yeah, we'll give you a new deal. We'll give you, 43, 44, whatever per year, but we're not going to be passing, the Mahomes, Watson, whatever deals, which, I mean, look, they don't have a lot of leverage. All the leverage lies with Wilson when you trade that much. So maybe he does top 50, but I don't think Denver is going to be too excited about that.
Yeah, I think he flexes his leverage muscles this offseason. I think a deal gets done before they ever take the first snap of this year. We'll have to wait and see where it falls in. Brad, great stuff. We always appreciate when you come in. We are going to get you out for that cocktail for the behind-the-scenes Viking stories one of these nights. Thanks for coming on with us this morning.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Brad Spielberger from overthecap.com and Pro Football Focus. All right, J-Mac, McMullen, and McDonald coming back. You know what we got to do. We got to put a bow on the show.